President Trump promised to make sweeping changes, and the first 2 weeks have been filled with a flurry of executive orders. I mean, just look at the picture here from last Tuesday. All those executive orders spread across his desk like one of those restaurants that give you too many menus. Tonight, we're going to focus on just one of those orders, though, that has a big, broad effect, particularly on our drinking water. So maybe you've seen the headlines. They've been everywhere today. Trump's halting of EPA limits on PFAS in drinking water, a tragic setback. Trump withdraws Biden administration plan to set discharge limits on PFAS in water. So they're talking about the limits on the companies that produce and dump cancer-causing chemicals into our waterways. And this halt on those limits is really just a small part of a much broader order that's impacting pretty much all federal government departments and agencies. So the order actually says this, quote, do not propose or issue any rule until a department or agency head appointed by the president reviews and approves the rule. So the administration calls it a regulatory freeze pending review. And it's one of a few freezes Trump has put in place. He ordered a hiring freeze of federal employees, you may remember. Today, he ordered a freeze on many federal grants and loans, although a federal judge did block that this afternoon. Essentially, he's trying to stop everything that the last administration was doing until he can get his people in place. It's simply a pause in most cases, but not with PFAS standards, because technically, the Biden administration never fully enacted it. So those rules for companies will go away entirely. The EPA withdrew the proposal. It's over. If you want it back, the new administration, the new head of the EPA would have to start from scratch. Now, this is a big deal because PFAS can cause cancer. And it's all over North Carolina. Each one of the dots on this map is a place in our state where the chemical was found in the water that people drink and bathe with and wash their produce with. WRL did a whole documentary about this. It's called Forever Chemicals. You can watch it right now on the WRLdoc.com. It's worth your time. Trust me. It tells the story of people living along the Cape Fear River where PFAS levels have been extremely high. Some folks have to use bottled water for everything because the tap water simply isn't safe.
You know, how has the contamination impacted your life?
Terribly. I have cancer. My dog has cancer. My doctors in Duke actually told me if I drank out the tap, it would make my cancer worse than what it is right now.
Now, look, some PFAS rules will stay on the books. Last year, the EPA passed some new drinking water standards, and that requires public water systems to monitor the PFAS levels and then to take action to reduce them if they get too high. But that can be very, very expensive, and that's something that you pay for, right? Not the companies producing the chemicals and dumping them into the waterways. You're paying it. They dump them. You pay to clean them up. I spoke to WRL climate change reporter Liz McLaughlin, who helped put together the documentary Forever Chemicals. Give me an idea of what is on pause and what is still happening when it comes to PFAS in our water.
It is a little bit confusing. So these forever chemicals, PFAS, during the Biden administration, the EPA passed a rule that would require utilities to limit the amount of these chemicals that are in our drinking water. That's a good thing, right? We're going to have safer water coming to our tap, especially in this state where we've seen really high levels of it in some communities. Now, what Trump did with his executive order was to roll back a proposed rule that was not yet in effect or even published, but that would have discharge limits for companies on what they could put in the drinking water. So what we're kind of talking about here is stopping it at the source versus stopping it from getting into our bodies as residents.
Given this decision and what it might mean for the future, what could this mean for people's water bills?
So we've already seen Wilmington, these downstream communities, have to invest hundreds of millions of dollars into these really fancy filter systems. And here, just in our area, we know Fayetteville, Burlington, for example, have really high levels, and they're going to have to get one of those big fancy filters as well. But there are some communities that are on the cusp. Looking at Durham, they're at about 4 parts per trillion, which is the federal limit. They're right there at the cusp. Now, if we could limit some at the source, there's less in the water to begin with before they have to filter it out. That could mean the difference between a $100 million system that's going to be on our water bills or not.
What is the state doing right now?
Basically, it's really hard to get that passed. Now, they are working on a minimization plan that could improve some tracking of this. They are really gathering a lot of data, so we know more about how much is in the water, but there's no clear path forward yet on really stopping it at the source.
When it comes to our efforts with clean drinking water, is that enough for filtration and going after these companies, or is it not enough to move the needle? Do we need to be thinking bigger?
It just is a really big mess, right? Because it's so ubiquitous. It's in our fast food wrappers, it's in cosmetics, like you said, it's in rain jackets and things, toilet paper, it's all over the map. So that really is part of it. But industrial discharges, a lot of the research about exposure is in our drinking water. And companies putting this water, these chemicals into our drinking water, into the Cape Fear River Basin, as we've seen here, really leads to spiked exposure levels beyond what you might normally get from normal interaction. But there may need to be more steps. You got to start somewhere.
All right, Liz, thank you. Okay, all right, so what are the possible consequences now of withdrawing this rule? Well, companies will most likely delay their plans to limit the amount of PFAS that they dump into the environment. They're going to wait until the new administration tells them what they have to do. But during that pause, the PFAS levels will continue to rise in our drinking water, putting the pressure then on the utility companies. Should they wait? Should they pull the trigger and install those expensive filtration systems before the PFAS limits cross that federal threshold? The new administration could start the process all over again with the same goal in mind, but that could take years. When Trump announced Lee Zeldin as his pick for the EPA, he wrote that he will maintain, quote, the highest environmental standards, including the cleanest air and water on the planet. And when Zeldin accepted the nomination, he posted, "We will restore U.S. energy dominance, and we will do so while protecting access to clean air and water." That is what they said, or what they wrote. We'll have to wait to see what they do. Let me know what you think about this. What other executive orders are you interested in? Do you want us to take a look at? Tell me what is on your mind, and we'll go in depth.